Salem Police Department launches urgent investigation into multiple disappearances. A crisis unfolds in days of our lives. The alarming situation begins when two residents vanish without a trace. The peaceful town of Salem has been thrown into chaos as two prominent residents have mysteriously disappeared, setting off alarm bells throughout the community and mobilizing law enforcement in ways not seen in quite some time. The Salem Police Department, under the leadership of Chief Jada Hunter, has declared a state of high alert as they work frantically to uncover the truth behind these troubling vanishments and bring the missing persons home safely. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when Theo Carver failed to appear for what should have been a pleasant evening. Jada, ever the dedicated and attentive friend, immediately recognized that something was amiss. Her instincts proved to be absolutely correct. What made the situation even more concerning was that Theo had been seen at the local pub not long before his disappearance, where he had engaged in a conversation with Gabby Hernandez, a well-known figure in Salem's social circles. After their chat concluded, Theo excused himself to step outside and take a phone call from his father, Abe Carver, who had reached out to speak with his son. This telephone conversation would become the last confirmed contact anyone would have with Theo before his mysterious disappearance. According to reports, Abe's call to his son was suddenly and unexpectedly cut off mid-conversation, with no explanation and no follow-up communication. The abrupt nature of this disconnection combined with Theo's failure to return for his date painted a deeply troubling picture. Jada's vigilance in noticing Theo's absence and immediately connecting the dots proved invaluable to launching the investigation, as she was able to provide law enforcement with a precise timeline and specific details about Theo's last known whereabouts and activities. The investigation intensifies, federal involvement and multiple cases converge. As the scope of the crisis became clearer, it became apparent that this situation was far more serious and complex than a simple missing person case. The discovery that Theo was not alone in his disappearance fundamentally changed the nature of the investigation. Chad DiMera, a member of Salem's most prominent and powerful family, had also gone missing under equally mysterious circumstances. With two prominent citizens vanishing and law enforcement unable to explain their whereabouts, the situation escalated dramatically. Given the gravity of the situation and the involvement of multiple missing persons, federal authorities were brought into the case. FBI Special Agent Rafe Hernandez, a man with extensive experience handling complex investigations and a deep personal connection to Salem, took charge of the inquiry into Chad's disappearance. Rafe's involvement signaled that authorities were treating this matter with the utmost seriousness and dedicating their most skilled resources to solving this puzzle and locating the missing individuals as quickly as possible. Chief Jada Hunter recognized the magnitude of the challenge facing her police department. She immediately implemented extraordinary measures, putting the entire Salem Police Department on the highest alert status. Every available officer was mobilized, every resource was allocated toward the investigation, and every lead, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, was being pursued with vigor and determination. The goal was clear and unambiguous: locate Theo and Chad and bring them home safely. However, as the investigation progressed, it became apparent that the mystery ran even deeper than initially suspected. Authorities began to wonder about the whereabouts of another family member, Tony DiMera. While Tony was not listed as missing in the official reports, his location and potential involvement in the events surrounding the disappearances became a point of concern for investigators. The police were working to account for all the key individuals involved in this developing situation and to understand the connections between all the missing and unaccounted for persons. Adding another layer of complexity to the situation was the case of Kristen DiMera. Kristen had recently escaped from Statesville prison, and while her disappearance was notable, it was treated somewhat differently by law enforcement. Rather than focusing their search efforts on Kristen, the police operated under the assumption that she was deliberately in hiding, using her freedom to remain out of sight and out of reach of authorities who would certainly attempt to recapture her and return her to prison. The primary focus of the investigation remained firmly on locating Chad and Theo, with Tony's whereabouts being a secondary concern. Kristen's case was viewed as a separate matter, at least in the immediate investigation into the kidnappings. And masking the culprit, Peter Blake emerges as the suspected orchestrator. One of the most significant developments in this unfolding drama came with the revelation of who might be behind these kidnappings. According to reliable sources within the entertainment community who have been tracking this storyline closely, the mastermind behind the abductions of Kristen, Chad, Tony, and Theo appeared to be Peter Blake, a name that would soon become central to Days of Our Lives' most compelling storyline. What made this revelation particularly noteworthy was its timing. Well before Peter Blake's official return was confirmed through the show's winter promotional materials and trailers, an exceptionally well-connected insider had already identified him as the kidnapper and orchestrator of this complex criminal operation. This early and accurate prediction demonstrated the high reliability of this particular source, who clearly maintained direct connections to the show's writers and production team. For regular viewers and loyal fans of Days of Our Lives, this validation of an insider source served as a reminder of how crucial these behind-the-scenes connections can be in understanding and predicting the direction of major storylines. The four kidnapping victims, Kristen, Chad, Tony, and Theo, found themselves in a terrifying and confusing situation where they were not only imprisoned against their will but also desperate to understand the reasons for their captivity. Who had taken them? What was this person's motivation? What did he want from them? These questions consumed their thoughts as they searched for any possible explanation that might shed light on their circumstances. Investigating suspects when family members become suspicious. As is often the case in complex criminal investigations, suspicion initially fell on those closest to the victims and their families. Tony DiMera, grappling with the shocking reality of his imprisonment, initially became convinced that his own nephew, Theo, might somehow be responsible for their predicament. The theory seemed plausible in Tony's mind. After all, family members sometimes harbor resentments and grudges that can fester over time and eventually explode into dramatic and destructive actions. However, as Tony had more time to think through this troubling hypothesis, he began to seriously reconsider his initial suspicion. He reflected on what he knew about Theo's character, his values, and his general approach to life and conflict. The more Tony contemplated the situation, the more he came to the conclusion that kidnapping family members and orchestrating an elaborate criminal scheme simply wasn't consistent with Theo's personality and nature. It wasn't his nephew's style, Tony realized. Theo was not the type of person who would resort to such extreme measures, regardless of whatever conflicts or disagreements he might have had with his relatives. The theory began to crumble under the weight of logical scrutiny, and Tony's suspicions shifted in a different direction. Kristen DiMera, meanwhile, found herself theorizing about another family member who might be capable of such a heinous act. Her suspicions fell upon her brother, E.J. DiMera, a man known throughout Salem for his ruthlessness, his willingness to bend or break rules when it suited his purposes, and his ambitious nature. Could E.J., Kristen wondered, be behind the kidnappings? Could he be holding them all prisoner while simultaneously orchestrating a coup d'etat to seize control of the vast and powerful DiMera Enterprises empire? The theory seemed to Feige had the motive, the means, and certainly the temperament that such a criminal operation would require. A staunch defense, Chad's unwavering belief in his brother's innocence. When Kristen voiced her suspicions about EJ to the other captives, she encountered unexpected resistance from an unlikely source, Chad DiMera himself. Despite being imprisoned and uncertain of his fate, Chad was adamant in his defense of his brother's character and innocence. He absolutely refused to entertain the notion that EJ could be responsible for kidnapping him and the others. Chad's conviction was not based on naivete or willful blindness, but rather on a deeper understanding of his brother's motivations and constraints. Chad explained his reasoning to Kristen and the others with a calm clarity that suggested he had given this matter considerable thought. He acknowledged that yes, EJ was certainly capable of playing dirty. Everyone in Salem knew that EJ DiMera was not above engaging in underhanded tactics, legal maneuvering, and ethically questionable practices when the situation called for it. EJ was, after all, a man who had built a significant portion of his influence and power through shrewd manipulation and a willingness to operate in the gray areas that exist between what is legal and what is moral. However, Chad insisted, there was one area where EJ would absolutely draw the line, and that was anything that might endanger his brother's children. Chad knew that EJ was not only representing him in the ongoing custody battle over Thomas DiMera and Charlotte DiMera, Chad's two children from his marriage to Abigail, EJ was emotionally invested in the outcome of this case, not merely as a lawyer fulfilling his professional obligations, but as an uncle who cared deeply about the welfare and futures of his young niece and nephew. If EJ were to be revealed as a kidnapper, if his involvement in criminal activity came to light, it would inevitably destroy his legal credibility and his ability to effectively represent Chad in the custody battle. Furthermore, any revelation of EJ's criminal activity would likely be used against Chad by opposing counsel as evidence of poor judgment and questionable associations, potentially strengthening the case against him in his efforts to maintain custody of Thomas and Charlotte. EJ would never risk his ability to help his brother retain custody of his children by engaging in criminal activities that could backfire so spectacularly. The potential consequences were simply too great, and the damage to the family too severe. The path to resolution, a visit to the mausoleum, will clarify everything. As the investigation continued and the theories and suspicions circulated among the prisoners and their loved ones outside the walls of their prison, a light began to emerge at the end of the tunnel. Word came that EJ would be accompanying the kidnapping victims to the mausoleum in the coming week. DiMera Family Mausoleum, a place laden with family history, significance, and mystery. This planned visit was particularly significant because it would provide concrete, observable evidence of EJ's potential involvement or innocence. If EJ was indeed the mastermind behind the kidnappings, his participation in this visit would be revealed as part of an even more elaborate plan, and his guilt would become apparent through his actions and demeanor. Conversely, if EJ was innocent, Chad steadfastly maintained that his presence and behavior during this encounter would serve to exonerate him completely, vindicating Chad's unwavering faith in his brother's character. The mausoleum visit represented a turning point in this dramatic saga. It was the moment when truth would finally emerge from the shadows of speculation and suspicion. Soon, the residents of Salem and the viewers following this gripping storyline would have the answers they had been desperately seeking. The identity of the true kidnapper would be confirmed, the motivations behind these heinous crimes would be revealed, and the mystery that had held the entire community in its grip would finally be solved. Whatever transpired at the mausoleum would change everything, setting the stage for the dramatic confrontations, emotional reconciliations, and ultimate justice that would follow in the weeks and months to come.